of your program?
Okay, so I am Kwabena Opoku-Agyeman, and the name of my program is Ghana, Africa in the 21st Century. Am I talking too fast or it's
No,
fine?
you're great.
Okay.
Just this is on.
Oh yeah, then we have to sit in the sauna.
Sorry.
All right.
Okay, now let's try that one more time. I think it sounds great otherwise.
Say it again.
Okay, my name is Kwabena Opoku-Agyeman, and my program is Ghana, Africa in the 21st Century.
Yeah, we're great on both, so we can go.
Okay, great. So why don't you start by telling us a little about yourself and what your background is, what your academic background is, and what brings you to SIT.
Okay, so my name is Kwabena Opoku-Agyeman, and I'm the second of 3 children. My parents are academics, and my mother was actually an academic director of SIT, and she worked with the Ghana Diaspora Program, which was situated in Cape Coast. So I kind of grew up with SIT kids who came over and experienced Ghana in different contexts, and that gave me a certain level of interest in the program. In terms of my academic background, I have a master's from the University of Ghana and another master's from West Virginia University. Then I have a PhD from West Virginia University in English. And so I teach at the University of Ghana, and now I am the academic director for the Ghana, Africa in the 21st Century program.
Tell us a little more about your PhD, your focus.
Okay, so my PhD dissertation was on African electronic literature, specifically examples from Ghana, and I looked at the ways in which oral literature functioned in digital contexts. So I kind of took oral literature and digital literature, and I combined them together in different ways.
What drew you to that subject, and what did you find? What was interesting for you about it?
Well, I like technology in the first place, and all around me I saw how people were using digital technology to make creative things, and not just creative things, but I mean all kinds of things. Like people use phones to send messages to people, people use computers to check stuff out, people use WhatsApp and all these apps and so on and so forth all the time. So it's become sort of an everyday thing, you know, digital technology. And my interest was just how do people creatively harness these things in certain contexts that can lead to research in terms of literature. In other words, how do people use African digital creative expression in these ways? But also, of course, if you are looking at Africa, oral tradition and oral literature are very significant portions of African culture. So I wanted to see how oral literature and oral tradition influenced the ways in which people used these things. So that's what I went into. And I found that it was not a good idea to think that digital literature was going to replace older forms of technology, because what you would have is oral technology, print technology, and digital technology. So in the same way that print technology didn't necessarily just replace oral technology, digital technology doesn't replace print technology or oral technology. They simply function together in a very, very wide space. So you could have someone using oral literature techniques in a digital space and all kinds of very interesting things.
So it actually creates a larger body of work, a
Yes.
larger creative space.
Exactly. So then it helps us to expand our definitions of things that we might be sort of used to. So in other words, when you take any issue, because of digital technology, you can have a wider sort of understanding of the thing.
And how does that play into the theme of your program? Talk about that a little bit.
Okay, so there is a very quick way of mapping the two, because if we are looking at Africa in the 21st century, I think digital technology is one of the biggest signifiers of the 21st century. Everyone uses digital technology now, or almost everyone, right? So if you want to look at how Africa is functioning in this new century, I think that digital is a very good way of going into that area. And one of the mistakes a lot of people make is they think Africans simply consume digital technology. In other words, when an American makes Facebook, then Ghanaians use it. Or when an American makes like a Twitter or something else, then Ghanaians simply use it. But Africans are also producing their own things. So it's also important to look at those things. They might not be as big or as well known and so on and so forth, but they're also making their own examples of digital technology. And it will be interesting to see how these connect and how people can learn from each other. So I think the program will benefit from understanding these kinds of issues.
You said that you've been exposed to SIT students for a number of years since you yourself were young.
Yes.
So what are you seeing in terms of how are students changing, American students, and what are they looking for when they go on a program like this?
Okay, just in terms of demographics, I think they changed. It was a lot of students from rich, middle class, small liberal arts colleges. Then at a point I saw a lot of kids from more public universities, so on and so forth. I also think that study abroad was not as popular as before. A lot of people who went on it would typically go because they had this very, very sort of heightened interest. So they looked for these things themselves. But now the advertising is a bit more, so people are able to join onto these kinds of programs even without like necessarily looking as actively as before. So we're having a larger group of people coming in with different interests, which is, I think, is a good thing, because then we see like people willing and able to engage with things that they might not have that much of, that much knowledge of, you know. So then that gives a certain honest way of understanding things, because you're not coming in with a certain agenda which you might have if you were looking for it actively yourself.
But do you think that, I guess Americans in general, maybe not students, but Americans have a sort of a preconception about Ghana?
Definitely. And I think that holds true for every culture. So I wouldn't even think it's only Americans who see Ghana or see Africa or see some other country and have a preconceived notion. The media is very powerful and very pervasive. So how I see it is typically Americans have this idea of Africa or Ghana based off what they watch on CNN or some major mainstream media. And in the reverse, Ghanaians have a very sort of, like the idea that Ghanaians have of America is also based off Hollywood movies. So there is this sort of give and take kind of thing going on. And I think when they come to Ghana, they will see that yes, there are some of the stereotypes hold true to an extent. After all, stereotypes are not necessarily wrong. The problem with the stereotype is you take that single truth and make it represent everybody else. And that is a problem. So they will see some of the things that they've seen on CNN and so on and so forth, but they'll realize that that's not the only thing. And then they will see that people are as normal as they are. They have the same anxieties, they have the same strengths, they have the same worries, they have the same things that they find interesting, and they will converge and diverge on different points. And I think that will be a strength that will help them to become better people and also learn from the people whom they are coming to interact with.
Because if you're learning about a country from CNN, you're probably learning about the disasters,
Yes.
you're learning about the breaking news, the war
Exactly.
she's in to a foreign country.
Definitely, yeah. And so I wouldn't necessarily blame CNN and the major media houses. After all, they are also maybe commercial and private, and they have their own interests. But ultimately, that shouldn't be the only thing that people see. And of course, you can go beyond that and read books and like interact and so on and so forth, especially in this 21st century where through digital technology, you can find out things from other sources and so on and so forth. But nothing beats experiential learning. It's best to go to the place, interact with the people, have an idea from your own perspective. But ultimately, and I will always make the students realize this, that regardless of what they see, regardless of what they do, regardless of what they experience, that is not going to be the end of it. They will always like be missing out on something, because no one ever has a sort of all-encompassing idea of a place. It just doesn't work that way. You will have a good idea, but that won't be the end of it. So it's a lifelong experience of learning and unlearning things. as you progress in life.
And that's really what an SIT program can do, is sort of
There you go.
develop the sense of lifelong learning, the sense of inquiry.
Exactly.
that-
Yeah, and the inquiry thing is also very interesting to me because of the ISP. Because as a student, you are primarily a researcher. So you are primarily trying to look at issues, interrogate things, problematize things, and come up with not just solutions, but let's say responses to the things that interest you. And I think the ISP is a very good way of doing this.
So your program is very multidisciplinary.
Yes.
So who would be interested in going on this?
Anyone would be interested. I think anyone from the specialized majors such as engineering and pre-med to the broad undecided majors, and everyone in between. Literature majors, sociology, those from the humanities, those from the arts, those from the sciences. I think they will all find something that they will be able to connect with in this program, just because I think the program is sort of foundational in the sense that it builds a certain level of knowledge and awareness of a country. And from that, they can build on that today to do all kinds of. Yeah, it happens,
Let me go grab mine.
right?
I tell other people to shut their phones.
And, okay, now
It's
You're one.
Ken Williams, the dean of Lift Grad. Once he starts calling.
He never stops. That's how it goes.
All right. So we were talking about the multidisciplinary
Yes.
nature of the program
And who would come in? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking any student, any undergraduate student will find some currency in this program. And when I say any, I mean from the highly specialized fields such as engineering or pre-med or nursing to the broader liberal arts. Even the undecided majors can find something interesting because the courses that are tied to the program are quite foundational, and they will be able to contextualize living in and relating to an evolutionary country. And I think that foundation will be able to then give them this confidence, as it were, and skill set to be able to go onto the ISP, which I think will, or the internship, either way, which will help them to look at an issue from a very narrow perspective, achieve enough depth, and come up with something creative that can be used in all kinds of exciting ways moving forward.
So what are some examples of independent research that you could think of off the top of your head that someone might, and I know it's specific to
Right,
the
right.
student, but what-
Okay, so let's say someone interested in anthropology or sociology or whatever might, let's say, have an idea of how. Can you let me think?
Oh,
of it.
sure, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
I had to cough anyway.
Okay. Okay. I'm thinking. Could I use the student who is coming in, or could I just mention? Okay. So.
Maybe in general.
Okay,
in
yeah.
general.
Okay, so right. So for instance, in Ghana, there is this sort of disconnect between the formal and the informal. So the formal is very sort of colonial and it has roots in the colonial experience, while the informal is sort of more traditional. So you might think of them as, let's say, those who cannot read or write or function in certain contexts, while the formal is mainly those who have Western style education. But then this disconnect can lead to all kinds of research opportunities. So for instance, a student could come in and think about like the attitudes of drivers to road signs. So for instance, a lot of drivers don't necessarily go to school and have Western style education to a very advanced level. So when they see road signs, what comes to mind? Like, do they see these as important? How do they even relate to these kinds of things? And just doing research on that level can lead to fascinating things. You could think about attitudes of market women to banks, right? So the banks have a lot of, they have the potential of making a lot of money from the savings of people who work in the informal sector. So how could a student look at the ways in which these market women or farmers or whatever demographic, how do they relate to these kinds of institutions, and how could this person come up with a model that bridges this gap and helps to connect this disconnect? Like, there are all kinds of things that anyone could do. And even if I go to the specific majors, like an engineering major could easily look at, let's say, the ways in which buildings are set up in Ghana and make an argument in terms of civil engineering, right? So even the medical student could do something on traditional medicine and how this connects with Western style medicine in the country. Like, there are so many things that anyone could do depending on their interest.
What about the homestays? Can you talk a little bit about what
Yes.
students could anticipate there?
Okay, so the students will spend a significant portion of the homestay in Accra, which is the capital of Ghana. And the thing about Accra is that it's very cosmopolitan. So there are people from different ethnic groups that gather in the same place. And as a result, you will have a lot of urban experiences. But another thing about living in Accra is a lot of the new middle class tend to speak English, right? Because of the Western education that I've been talking about. But then complementary with this, they will have a homestay in a rural area where the language is typically local. It will be cheap because that's what they will learn. And I think that spending time in these two different places will give them insight into the ways in which urban and rural Ghana differ and also complement each other, because they won't always see that, okay, one place is different from the other, but they'll see that two places do similar things but in different contexts, and they will learn how different people communicate cultural norms and how some of the things that they are used to will be challenged just by staying with another family, another culture. And I think the homestay will also learn from these American students as well, which is what I'm excited about, because then both will teach each other, and that's, I think, is the beauty of experiential learning.
That's the point, right?
Exactly.
And how about how the students interact with each other? How do you facilitate the kind of group dialogue or that exchange, especially if you have a very broad, multidisciplinary group of students
Yes.
from lots of different schools?
Well, in my experience of American students, and actually students in general, I find that they are able to find out things for themselves a lot. They are able to set their own rules and make sure that everyone sort of participates in the group in their own way. So I will not necessarily be a hands-on helicopter parent kind of person, but rather I think it's best to simply lay a few ground rules which we will all agree to, and then have them sort out their own group dynamics. Another thing I would like to do added to this is to integrate a few Ghanaian undergrads as well into their own experiences. And I think that will help, because then they will have classes with these Ghanaian students and meet them in other informal contexts. And that, I think, will help both groups to mix with each other in very, very interesting ways. So you'll see a Ghanaian talking to a Ghanaian talking to an American talking to an American, and so on and so forth. And I think that will lead to something that I will not be in control of, which is good, but then I will also be able to respond to it in my own way, depending on how things go. So I'm excited about that.
And build on it.
Exactly, yes. And that is actually, I think, the most important part, just building on these kinds of relationships that will come out. So both with the American students on their own, but also in other contexts.
I'm curious about whether you, in your own personal experiences, have maintained relationships with the people that you met when your mother was an AD.
Yes, I'm actually Facebook friends with a few of them, and we communicate once in a while. There's actually one who brings his own students to Ghana. He's a professor at, I think, an HBCU. So he was actually in Ghana when I was leaving, Robert, and he brings them once a year. Yeah, but there are others too whom I get in touch with once in a while, and they're all doing great, at least the ones I speak to.
That's great.
Yeah.
What else about your program? What else would you like to highlight that we haven't talked about?
Well, I think Ghana is a beautiful country. Ghana has so much to offer in terms of both educational and formal educational and then non-formal educational opportunities abound in the country. And I believe that any student who comes on into the program and interacts with the program will be going back to his or her home with a certain level of experience that I don't think they would get in other places and in other programs. So I would love to have as many people coming as possible.
So would we. That's excellent. Great.
Okay.
That's wonderful. That was great.
Thank you.